In 1960, I wrote a letter to my mother, and in that letter I suggested that there should be a source of energy, an absolute ridiculous minimum. Now, ridiculous. It couldn't be so small. It'd have to be at least 1 billion times more powerful than the sun, our star. And it probably did exist, but we probably would not discover it, since if it existed and it was close to us, we would have long since seen it. So therefore, it must be an incredibly small magnitude star, and no astronomer would ever pay attention to it. Well, I completely forgot about radio telescopes. 1964, 4 years later, I pick up a newspaper and I'm reading the headlines, and it says quasi-stellar sources, quasars. And I looked at it and I read it, and this is what it's talking about. This is what I had estimated 4 years earlier. So essentially, I had made a prediction. Of course, I didn't make it to any university, I just made it to my mother. But the newspaper also commented that there was no known theory, no scientist, nobody in this world that had any kind of a concept that had come close to it. Well, this is exactly what I was saying. A single star putting out as much energy as an entire galaxy. That's why in the letter to my mother, I'd said it's a ridiculous, utterly ridiculous minimum, 1 billion times more powerful than our star. Well, in 1968, when I wrote that letter to Dr. Gamow, this letter contained the basis for my 1960 prediction about the quasi-stellar sources. In that letter, I also pointed out something, that the Kamchatka Peninsula in Siberia, where in 1906, I think it was, there was a fantastic explosion. They went out and they looked at this place. And here in the middle of a forest, and I saw a picture of it when I was a school child, and there's a fantastic depression, and the trees in every direction are laid perfectly flat. They were sheared off at the ground level, and you could see the pine needles just perfectly in every direction as you go out from this depression, and it's a massive depression. Now, the interesting thing about this depression and about these trees, and I pointed this out in the letter, there was no fire. Now, every form of energy, specifically energy, known to man, eventually deteriorates into thermal release, basically heat. So, if there had been an energy release, the minimal effort of this release would have been a fire. And here's a forest, the trees laid down, the needles there, and yet no fire. Now, you cannot break a matchstick without detecting some small amount of heat. And when you take and snap a tree off, there's more than enough heat there to set the wood on fire. Yet there was no fire. And in the depression, where whatever that explosion was, it would have been molten, because here's rock that had been utterly crushed, pushed down. Pressure and temperature should have been fantastic. It should have been tens of thousands of degrees, more than enough to start a fire. The rock should have been molten. That depression should have been molten. But I pointed out in the letter it was not molten. In fact, there was no evidence whatsoever of any form that there had been any heat at all. I pointed out that what had occurred is that energy itself, just as an atom breaks apart to make energy, because it is energy packed together to make an atom, if you take a piece of energy and you break it apart, you'll have a reaction faster than the speed of light. And since light is energy, you do not get an energy reaction, you get a force reaction. Now, if you break energy apart, you will get such a massive reaction that it made this depression, blasted down the forest, and since it was less than energy, it did not make heat, because light is heat. Now, when I suggested that in the letter, the Russians actually went back out to the Kamchatka Peninsula, once again took a look at it, and realized that I'm the first person to stop to think that there had not been a fire there, and that what I was saying was probably correct. And that was the first piece of physical evidence that they really had, in which I'd predicted something, and it was actually true. Here was the depression, the Kamchatka Peninsula, And they've since estimated it would take well over 5,000 hydrogen bombs, the largest, to make that same kind of reaction. But no heat. Not one tiniest bit of heat was released. So what it was the destruction of energy into its more basic fundamental parts which had occurred there. And I had suggested that possibly a couple of particles of light had collided and disintegrated, and the reaction would be faster than the speed of light. And this is a force field.